right, welcome back to another episode of the Psychopedia podcast. I'm your host, Investigator Slater, and I have been running around like a chicken without its head, which is a terrible expression that I hate, and I can't believe I just used it. But producer Tony actually suggested a rendition of that expression that I think works a lot better for us. And it's, I was running around like a chicken head on a priest's penis. Yes, Tony, that works.
Might keep that, might not keep that chicken head part.
So somebody commented on Spotify today that they loved hearing Matt's voice. I think it's okay for you guys to punctuate, not
all right, strap in, Slater.
Busting down the door in the middle of a heavy moment, but something like you just did, how about a chicken head on a priest's penis? That's great. That's fantastic.
Strap in, Slater. I'm getting my fucking stand-up routine ready. Opening at Zany's in Nashville next week.
Oh, God. All of this is to say that I've just been super, super busy in all of the best ways. Obviously, always focused on Psychopedia, cranking out the true crime content for you guys. Got some bonus episodes ahead. Lots of stuff on Patreon going on. And then 2 days from today, I have a big photo shoot booked, which I'm so excited about because I need to do a little bit of rebranding for Psychopedia, but I also need to get some images for Girl on Gore, which, if you have not yet heard, is my new podcast series that drops on the Psychopedia channel. So if you are not subscribed to Psychopedia, wherever you listen to your podcasts, you might miss it. So I'm going to say this now with a heartfelt please and thank you. If you guys could subscribe to Psychopedia, number one, so you stay on top of all of the hot shit going on over here. But number two, because I have all of this new stuff happening with Girl on Gore, it's kind of imperative that you subscribe so you follow everything and stay on top of everything. I'd just be very grateful if you did that. If not, that's okay too. I love you all the same. Speaking of Girl on Gore, I just want to tell you a little bit about it. So it's my new podcast series that I host. I deliver it, I write it. The whole thing is me, but it's me in character. So it's a not so true crime genre while also exploring real true crime topics that we talk about here on Psychopedia. So we talk about, criminological theory and psychology and forensics and all of that. It's kind of a place for me to have my alter ego come out and play, but also to really loop in real true crime stuff, which is my absolute passion, and I suspect it's your passion as well if you are listening to this. If you want early access to Girl on Gore, that also happens on patreon.com/psychopediapod. So Girl on Gore drops every Monday publicly for free wherever you listen to your podcast, like I said. But if you want early access, to the heat, then it's on patreon.com/psychopediapod. It's going to come out a week early than it will publicly. Also on Patreon, you get ad-free Psychopedia episodes that drop the same day that it releases publicly. You get one Slaterpedia every single month, multiple unhinged episodes every single month, which now stars you guys, the listeners, as my guest co-hosts. It's a really good time on Patreon. I definitely recommend you check it out and join. The Semen Demon tier is where you're going to get that early access to Girl on Gore. All right. I want to just give some shout-outs, some propers to some of the new patrons because they deserve it. So welcome this week to Scaredy Cat. Psychopedia. I don't know what that means. I like the way it sounds on my tongue, so I chose it. Amanda Long. Hi, I'm Brooke Short. We have Leslie Cruz, and then Leslie put a pink heart next to her name, which I love the love. John Lagana, which I have to admit I thought said lasagna at first, which is why I chose it. And then I read it again and I'm like, nope, it's Lagana. And Brandon Holland. So there's more, but these are the ones that I chose today to highlight. Welcome to everybody who's new on Patreon. If this is your first time here, welcome. If it is your 100th and whatever time here, welcome home, freak. So happy to have all of you here with me. Means so much to me, as always, that you're here listening and that you're on this journey with me. Thank you. Before we get started, I really want to warn you guys about today's episode, okay? I don't typically offer trigger warnings. Sometimes I will in the show notes. Sometimes I will verbally. I feel compelled to do that today because we are talking about the horrific crime of infanticide. So if that's something that's going to be very upsetting to you, which I completely understand, maybe today isn't for you. Maybe you want to wait and come back next week. That said, of course, I will be delivering it respectfully because it deserves that, obviously. And it's just a fascinating case in general. Horrible and deplorable and heartbreaking, but really interesting in terms of the social context. So obviously, whatever, I'm talking too much. Let's just get into it, all right? Let me just get into it. Let me go. Let me do my thing. Here we go. It was the bitterly cold night of January 12th, 1948, and the streets of Tokyo's Shinjuku district were thick with unease. The city was still reeling from the chaos of war, and violent crime was surging like a rising tide no one could hold back. Police presence had been ramped up across the district, boots on pavement, eyes scanning the shadows, nerves sharp. On that cold January night, 2 patrolling officers from the Waseda station noticed a man pedaling his bicycle slowly through the dark in a dimly lit back street. His name was Mr. Nagasaki, and he was a well-known local undertaker. But it wasn't necessarily the fact that he was riding his bike at night that even caught their attention. Rather, it was the wooden orange crate strapped to the back of his bicycle, a crate that somehow looked out of place. So the officers flagged him down and asked Mr. Nagasaki what was in the box. Mr. Nagasaki shifted uncomfortably, stammered, tried to deflect, but the officers held to their questions firmly until eventually, reluctantly, he stepped aside to allow them to inspect the contents of the crate. And what the police uncovered was neither a bushel of fruit nor a parcel of personal effects, but rather a knit shirt concealing something far more disturbing. And when they unwrapped the contents of the shirt, what they discovered would go on to blow the lid off one of the most shocking and horrific series of crimes in post-war Japan. Because devastatingly, what lay beneath the knit shirt inside that wooden crate was the body of a dead infant, still wearing a diaper. Mr. Nagasaki explained that he'd been summoned to retrieve the body of the infant from a local facility known as the Kotabuki maternity home and was instructed to transport it to the mortuary for cremation the following day. But then came a chilling admission. This was not an isolated request. It was, in fact, the 5th deceased infant he had collected from the same maternity home that day. Because it turned out that Mr. Nagasaki's services had been routinely enlisted beginning 6 months earlier, and that the number of confirmed infant deaths linked to the Kotabuki maternity home had climbed to 103. Today, we are talking about one of Japan's most notorious female serial killers, Miyuki Ishikawa, aka the Demon Midwife. So I'd like to begin by painting a portrait of Japan during the period in question, because, per usual, understanding the landscape of that time is vital for making sense of how such a tragedy was not only possible, but essentially allowed to quietly unfold. Following World War II, Japan was a nation on its knees, its cities reduced to rubble, its economy in tatters, and its people barely scraping by. The Allied occupation, led primarily by the United States, set its sights on rebuilding not just the infrastructure, but the ideology of the entire country. A thriving capitalist Japan, American officials believed, would serve as a powerful shield against the creeping threat of communism in the region. But before any political agenda could even take root, there was hunger. Vast, relentless, and absolutely everywhere. Food shortages had begun during the war and only worsened in the years that followed. By 1946, daily rations had dropped to a mere 1,040 calories per person, barely enough to really survive, let alone sustain the physical demands of rebuilding a nation that was still reeling from war, destruction, and loss. In Tokyo, citizens waited in lines for hours, clutching ration tickets and praying that there would be something left when their turn came. Global grain shortages in 1945 and 1946 made matters worse, and desperation gave rise to a sprawling black market economy. Rice, soy sauce, sugar, once staples, became now luxury items, hoarded and sold at cutthroat prices in alleyways and behind closed doors. Amidst the chaos and deprivation, necessity bred invention. In fact, one of the most enduring symbols of post-war innovation was born from the hunger that gripped the nation. Pop quiz number 1. What was
boy.
what was invented at this time to specifically address the needs of the people? A, instant ramen. B, hunger-suppressing medication. C, vitamin-infused cigarettes.
I'm going to go ahead and jump in here and take a guess.
All right, let's go.
I think that it is going to be A, instant ramen.
What do you think, Matt? Because I saw you playing along over there, too.
Same.
Same?
My instinct was ramen.
The answer is A, instant ramen. I thought I did pretty good with those two, with B and C, but maybe hunger-suppressing medication is just, Ozempic is like a here and now type of thing, I guess. But yes, Endo Momofuku, a Taiwanese-born Japanese entrepreneur, saw firsthand the emaciated people standing in lines with empty bowls and responded with a now ubiquitous solution. Instant ramen. Cheap, filling, and shelf-stable, it became the unofficial food of salvation. And it still offers a solution so effective that it's still clogging arteries and supporting broke college kids everywhere today.
It's actually kind of interesting because it parallels how hyper-processed food started becoming a thing in the U.S. during the 1950s and that time period. It's very, very interesting how that's a global thing that started happening specifically in that post-war era.
Well, necessity breeds invention, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Meanwhile, despite the widespread hunger and poverty gripping 1940s Japan, the population was still exploding. In a paradox that only war can create, peace brought with it a flood of births. From 1947 to 1949, Japan logged approximately 2.7 million births per year, the largest baby boom in the country's recorded history. In 1948, just to give some big picture numbers here, Japan's population was estimated to be about 77 million people, which is up from 72 million in 1945. That is an insane surge. So the fertility rate surged past 4.3 children per woman, which I always laugh at that, 4.3. It's just is what it is. I understand what it means, but it's still silly sounding. Some attributed this to the backlog of wartime marriages finally being consummated, while others suspected something darker, a kind of national nihilism. After such catastrophic loss, many had just abandoned ideas of restraint or family planning altogether. But it doesn't even matter. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. Millions of new mouths to feed in a country still struggling to care for the ones it already had. Hospitals were overcrowded, housing was scarce, and children were often born into lives of immediate poverty and uncertainty. In this environment, institutions like maternity homes flourished, not necessarily out of charity, but out of necessity. And behind their doors, not all offered refuge, because some, like Kotabuki Maternity Home, were hiding something much, much worse. In practice for some, but tragically only in theory for others, maternity homes offered women facing financial and societal hardship a place to give birth discreetly, with the promise of care for their infants provided by professional midwives. And while the Japanese government authorized these types of facilities to promote quote-unquote human capital and to actually prevent infanticide, particularly in dense urban areas like Tokyo, many of these homes operated on the margins and remained underregulated and overwhelmed. Human capital, by the way, refers to the idea of investing in the health and the well-being and potential productivity of a population, particularly infants and children who presumably then go on to grow into workers that contribute to society and the economy. So that's why that's referred to as human capital.
Interestingly, I wonder if that giant boom in this time period is why the population has declined so much. You know what I mean? It's almost like a correction back the other way.
Yeah.
Because Japan's population is super, super duper old.
Yeah, I mean, it is common for post-war nations to have this boom in, I think I actually have a pop quiz coming up about that.
Oh.
Yes, I do. Okay. So I'm not going to talk about that anymore. The Kotabuki Maternity Home was one of dozens of maternity homes scattered across Tokyo, which was a city very much still rebuilding itself from the ashes of war. Established during World War II, Kotabuki was owned and operated by a married couple. Takeshi Ishikawa, a retired police constable, and his wife, Miyuki Ishikawa, a respected figure in the field of midwifery and maternal care.
Midwifery.
I think it's midwifery. I looked it up.
Is it?
To give it I looked it up. It is indeed pronounced midwifery. I asked my mother, first of all, who is a nurse, and she told me it was midwifery. Now, I love my mom, but she also says ER instead of ER for emergency room. So, I double-checked, even though she's always right. I love you so much, Mommy. And it is midwifery, not midwifery. So there you have it.
Now you know.
Now you know. On the surface, Kotabuki Maternity Home was a refuge, a lifeline for desperate mothers and their new babies. But beneath its modest exterior and air of compassion, Kotabuki concealed the quiet slaughter of newborn babies. And captaining this cradle-to-grave scam with psychopathic calm was none other than Miyuki Ishikawa. Miyuki Ishikawa was born in 1897 in the quiet town of Kunitomi, nestled in Japan's Miyazaki Prefecture. Yes. A prefecture, by the way, is more or less kind of like a state. Ambitious and exceptionally driven, she graduated from the prestigious University of Tokyo, which was like a rare achievement for a woman and one that set her apart very early on. She began her career as a midwife in her hometown, where she quickly earned a reputation for competence and calm under pressure. She even, unsuccessfully but still, ran for public office. Eventually, Miyuki married Takeshi Ishikawa, a former police constable, 3 years her senior. Now, the couple weren't able to have children of their own, as Miyuki had had a hysterectomy, but they went on to adopt 3 children. And over the years, Miyuki's experience and authority grew and grew, and she and her husband opened the doors of the Kotabuki Maternity Home in 1944 with a humanitarian mission to provide care for impoverished women and their newborn babies. But beneath her starched uniform and practiced smile, Miyuki, who served as the director of the facility, curated something closer to a quiet genocide than a maternity home. The women who came to Kotabuki were amongst the most vulnerable in post-war Japan. Many were widows, domestic servants, or sex workers. Most were unwed. They arrived in secret, carrying pregnancies conceived outside the boundaries of social acceptability with no means, financial or otherwise, to raise a child on their own. The home offered a promise of shelter, of care, of dignity, and for some, the possibility of adoption for those newborn babies. In its founding year, 1944, the home admitted just 14 or 15 babies. In the following 2 years, 1945 and 1946, that number rose to between 30 and 40 annually. By 1947, the number of children admitted had exploded to over 100. Why the dramatic spike? Well, you tell me. Pop quiz. Why did the number of children admitted into the Kotabuki maternity home explode in 1947? A. That year, troops of American soldiers came over to Japan, leading to a much higher pregnancy rate. B. A state-sanctioned 2-child limit was introduced as part of population control efforts. C. The Ishikawas had begun placing ads in newspapers soliciting new mothers to drop off their babies.
So, producer Tony's guess is going to be, I think, A. I'm going to go with A.
Okay.
What you got, Matt? What's your guess?
I don't know.
Solid contribution.
Yeah.
A plus.
A plus.
A plus.
I mean, A kind of makes sense, but also doesn't.
It's definitely not B.
Make sense. I'm gonna go with C.
Okay.
It's definitely not B.
Well, Matt, you came out of the gate a little weak, but you landed on your feet and you got it right. Yeah. So and I'm sorry, producer Tony, but you took your shot, and we don't always make our shots.
It's okay.
The Ishikawas had begun placing ads, solicitations, literally seeking children between ages 1 and 3. These weren't birth mothers arriving in crisis during labor. These were now women bringing their babies, weeks or months old, to the maternity home, hoping that the home would offer their child a better future. According to the maternity home's own records, only a handful, no more than 10 or 12 of the children taken in during 1947 had actually been born there. The rest were brought in by mothers who, for a fee of 5,000 to 6,000 yen, surrendered all parental rights. The payment was made under the pretense that the Ishikawas would arrange for these children to be adopted into loving homes. And they were also there to care for these babies because remember, these women were either outcast socially because they were unwed, or they were widowed, or their husbands left them, and they either didn't have the financial means or just that support that they needed to support a baby. But of course, as later events would reveal, the true fate of many of those children never involved adoption at all. Tony, I know what you're doing. I know you so well. You are Googling what 5,000 to 6,000 yen
is in USD.
Yeah,
and
I
it's
know
actually,
you
I don't
so
have
well.
an easy, I don't have an easy converter. I think it's fascinating. Well, because it's like, even like inflation aside, just how like the perspective of like how much money that actually was. So it looks like, I don't have 1947. It looks like in 1950, one US dollar was worth 361 Japanese yen, which would be about $205 in today's, in USD today.
Okay.
Yeah. So pretty pricey, really.
Especially given their dire circumstances and how vulnerable they were.
For sure.
Absolutely. But think about it, right? Like that was the price to literally save their child's life in their minds. But steep, nevertheless. By 1948, the year that tiny body was discovered in the wooden orange crate, General Douglas MacArthur, the supreme commander of the Allied powers, known simply by the acronym SCAP, was tasked with dismantling Japan's military machine, rebuilding its institutions from the ground up, and keeping the entire social order from collapsing under the weight of its own devastation. MacArthur and his administration were absolutely everywhere, rewriting laws, overseeing elections, regulating the press, and yes, even investigating maternity homes. Because SCAP wasn't just concerned with rebuilding infrastructure, it was deeply invested in reshaping Japan's future, and that included how the most vulnerable members of society were treated: women, children, and the impoverished. So when news reached American and Japanese officials about the discovery of the baby in the fruit crate having been picked up from the Kotabuki maternity home, SCAP personnel joined Japanese authorities to conduct an in-person inspection. And what they found was not just appalling, it's just absolutely heartbreaking. Their field report reads like a quiet scream. Only 4 surviving infants, visibly malnourished, lie listlessly in soiled bedding. The home itself was filthy. There was no access to clean running water. The air reeked of neglect and something else, I'm going to say death, but something institutional, bureaucratic, perpetrated by depravity and permitted by silence. The standards of care weren't just lax, they were completely non-existent. Now, according to reports made the week of the Ishikawa's arrest, following the discovery of that one deceased infant, the couple initially claimed that the reason the 5 children in their care in January of 1948 died, the ones Mr. Nagasaki, the undertaker, was paid to pick up from the home and cremate, was because the maternity home had started to receive powdered milk rations that month that they did not know how to properly prepare. So, in other words, they were claiming that the children had died from dysentery. But even if the powdered milk excuse had any truth to it, it still could not account for the autopsy findings, and it certainly did not explain the 85 other children who died under the Ishikawa's care in 1947, most within just weeks of their arrival. The truth began to surface when several of the infants, whose bodies had been stored in Mr. Nagasaki's mortuary awaiting cremation, were sent to nearby Keio University for examination. The autopsies revealed a grim and undeniable reality. The babies' stomachs were completely empty. Officially, 3 of the 5 children were found to have died from malnutrition, and the other 2 had succumbed to hypothermia. Starved and frozen, left to die in a place that was supposed to protect them and give them a future. Furthermore, it also didn't explain another damning discovery made during the investigation, one that completely obliterated the dumbass narrative that the children's deaths were just an unfortunate side effect of not knowing how to mix powdered milk. Because let's be honest, this was not a kitchen mishap. This was a cover story. Thin, lazy, and insultingly stupid in the face of what investigators actually found. And that was large stockpiles of hoarded food found inside the Kotabuki maternity home. During their investigation, police seized 18 pounds of powdered milk, 12 pounds of sugar, and 42 pounds of rice, all stored away, untouched, while the children in their care withered from starvation. Within days of that fateful encounter between the patrol officers and Mr. Nagasaki, the motive had begun to take monstrous shape, and it had nothing to do with incompetence. The infants were being deliberately starved so the Ishikawas could line their pockets. According to contemporary records, the Kotabuki maternity home wasn't functioning as a maternity home at all, on any level. It was operating as an unlicensed, unethical adoption agency at best and a death mill at worst. The Ishikawas were accepting payments from desperate mothers trying to find safe and loving homes for their babies, while hoarding and then selling the food and supplies meant for those babies on the black market and letting the infants die in the process in order to maximize profit. In essence, they were monetizing infanticide. You see, as a registered maternity home, the Ishikawas were entitled to government-issued rations, supplies obviously meant to sustain the infants in their care. But rather than nourishing the children, the Ishikawas turned survival into currency. The powdered milk, critical for undernourished infants, was quietly siphoned off and sold on the black market for profit. Even the rations of sake provided by the government to perform traditional Buddhist funeral rites for deceased children were exploited. According to witnesses, Mr. Ishikawa boasted openly at a local pharmacy that he kept one of the 2 ceremonial bottles for himself each time a child died, treating infant death not as a tragedy, but as opportunity. Though he would later deny direct involvement in the actual killings, during police interrogation, Mr. Ishikawa made one admission that laid bare the rot at the heart of their operation. The business, he said, would not have survived if the children were allowed to. It was a grotesque machine fueled by death, methodical, sustained, and designed to turn suffering into profit. The police calculated that throughout 1947, between the amount they charged each mother minus what they had to pay in undertaker fees, the Ishikawas had made 500,000 yen gross profit from the Kotabuki maternity home. That's about $200,000 US today. A shit ton of money, and a shit ton of money back then. In terms of the precious little lives lost, the initial findings of the authorities were staggering. Of the 199 children the Ishikawas had taken in, 168 had died. That's 85%. Later reporting lowered the number to around 100 children, and the most conservative estimates landed at 85. So it's somewhere in that ballpark. So I think in the intro I mentioned it was 103. That seems to be like what the general consensus is. In Mr. Nagasaki's funeral home alone, the cremated remains of between 30 and 40 children were discovered. Less than a week after Mr. Nagasaki's encounter with the 2 officers, the story hit the public and it ignited a firestorm. The headlines spread like wildfire, and with them came outrage, disbelief, and a reckoning that Japanese society could no longer ignore. Many of the mothers who paid to have their children sent to Kotabuki maternity home for the purpose of finding them safe and loving homes rushed back to the hospital. One 27-year-old woman from Yokohama's Kohuku's ward, which is the capital city of Kanagawa Prefecture and is the second largest city in Japan after Tokyo, came to Kotabuki maternity home and went right up to the second floor. When she arrived in a room the size of 3 tatami mats, which is tiny, that had torn paper doors and no fire for warmth, 8 tiny heads were lined up on a bamboo bed. The third from the left was her baby boy, whom she'd left there on the 11th of January. She burst out crying while attempting to breastfeed him, but the baby wouldn't or couldn't drink. The woman cried and screamed, calling out that her baby had literally forgotten how to drink as she stroked his swollen head. When she looked at the other babies in that bed, she was appalled and heartbroken to see that the baby sleeping on the far right, who had gauze wrapped around its mouth, was dead. The mother then returned to Yokohama saying, quote, "I can't leave him here for even a moment. I was abandoned by my husband and could not return to my parents, so I found out about this maternity home through a newspaper ad and paid the 6,000 yen deposit fee to have my baby disposed of," end quote, which is obviously a translation, and her meaning was almost certainly not that she wanted her child disposed of, meaning killed, obviously, but that she believed the maternity home would find someone to adopt him. During the week of the initial SCAP investigation, 7 infants were found clinging to life inside the Kotabuki maternity home. 2 died within days of being rescued, one on the night of January 14th, the other the following morning. 2 were reclaimed by their biological mothers, their faces etched with disbelief and regret. 2 more were adopted out, their fates uncertain, but at least they were given a chance. And the 7th vanished, just completely erased from public records, lost forever. In the days that followed, a handful of parents returned to the home, driven by dread, guilt, as I imagine, and emotions that I won't even try to label or understand, to check on the children that they had entrusted to the home's care months earlier. They had originally arrived to the home believing that they were giving their babies a shot at a better life, but what they found instead when they arrived now was a nightmare in slow motion. The future they had clung to, the ones where their children were fed, safe, and maybe even loved, had never existed. It was a fiction sold to the desperate. In its place were sunken eyes, silent cribs, and the unbearable stench of rot. Their children hadn't been given a chance. They hadn't been cared for. They'd been culled, starved behind a facade of compassion in an institution that posed as sanctuary, but operated like a slaughterhouse with better branding. Needless to say, pieces of shit Miyuki and Takeshi Ishikawa were arrested on January 26, 1948. Additionally, one of the midwives who worked under Miyuki, known in official records only as Midwife Assistant K, was also indicted on charges of murder. Mr. Nagasaki, the undertaker, was also arrested, but was released due to insufficient evidence that would make him a knowing accomplice. Essentially, there was no way to prove that he knew that the death certificates Miyuki handed him when he collected the children's remains were fraudulent. I still feel like there should have been some accountability. There should have been something, some price for him to have paid. He was given death certificates, so I'm not suggesting that, there was like an immediate red flag. But even the amount of children dying, even if, these death certificates made you feel like they were legit, even a legitimate amount of deaths, like in those numbers, is staggering. Like, how do you not take the next step? Agreed.
Doesn't raise an eyebrow in any way, shape, or form. It's like, no, that's fine. That's totally normal. It's like,
You sure? You sure? There's not one little thing you want to look further into there? One question you want to ask? I digress. As the investigation went on, the full extent of the Ishikawa's criminal enterprise began to unravel. They had built quite the tight-lipped, coordinated network, beginning with the very man who had first drawn police suspicion and the one we just went off on, the undertaker, Mr. Nagasaki. For his part in the operation, Nagasaki was paid 500 yen per infant corpse to quietly dispose of the bodies. No questions, no follow-up paperwork, which I looked up, Tony, and that's only about $3 in today's month.
I was literally doing the math in my head as you were going through that.
Yeah, I know that's big for you. Yeah. So
thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. It doesn't perhaps seem like a lot, but again, it adds up. And for the time when people are standing in food lines, it was not nothing. Authorities later discovered additional remains at his residence, but he wasn't even the only one moving bodies. A second undertaker working beneath Mr. Nagasaki was also found to have disposed of at least 40 more infant corpses on behalf of the Ishikawas. 30 more bodies were discovered under a temple. These numbers are batshit crazy. Remains were even traced back to the Ishikawa home itself. Hidden inside of a kerosene canister, investigators found a small bone urn containing the cremated remains of a child. Police believe the child may have belonged to a prominent public figure and was hidden in a sack of rice after the Ishikawas caught wind of the upcoming search of their property. Despicable. In terms of who was signing off on these death certificates that the Ishikawas were providing to Mr. Nagasaki and the government, enter 60-year-old Dr. Shiro Nakayama, the Ishikawa's crooked on-call physician. He had been issuing official death certificates for the children without examining their bodies and falsifying causes of death to cover up the crimes. He, too, was paid 500 yen per corpse, and at the time of his arrest, he had allegedly falsified over 60 death certificates. This operation was as bureaucratic as it was brutal. Children at Kotabuki maternity home were classified as either registered or unregistered. So this is now how we're getting into some more of the crooked business operations, okay? Registered children had official birth records and were eligible for state welfare and ration supplies. Unregistered children, most often born to unmarried mothers, did not exist on paper, making them far harder to trace. In that bureaucratic gray area, the Ishikawas saw opportunity. They would falsely label registered children as unregistered to streamline illegal adoptions and avoid legal scrutiny. Then, when an unregistered child died, they'd reuse the identity of a previously adopted registered child to obtain a legitimate death certificate, laundering the death to keep their operation clean on paper. And if a registered child died, they simply pretended the child had never existed, continuing to collect rations and embezzle government supplies meant for the living. Even baby supplies sent by the parents, because some did send diapers, clothing, formula, those were also resold on the black market. What should have been a refuge for vulnerable babies had become hollowed out and repurposed into a cold, profit-generating machine. And the money spoke volumes. At the time of her arrest, Miyuki Ishikawa, living in a nation still crawling out of the rubble of war, had a telephone in her home, which was an extreme luxury at the time, owned land in both Tokyo and Ibaraki Prefecture, and was in the process of purchasing a new high-end car. Not too shabby for someone who claimed she couldn't figure out how to work the powdered milk.
Why do they always go and buy fancy cars? I've never understood that.
It makes zero sense. Like, why would you draw attention to your shady operations? The world around you is literally in ashes. People are waiting in line for food. Babies are supposedly dying for legitimate reasons in your care, and you're driving around a flashy car? Fucking idiot. I always say this, Tony. I always say, people love to think that criminals are like these genius masterminds. You know, that's how like Hollywood has us believing.
Oh,
by and large,
not at all.
They are fucking nincompoops, like all of them. They figure out a loophole, or they just, fly under the radar long enough to commit these horrific acts. But honestly, they're idiots. Now, some midwives allegedly did try to intervene at various points, which, like, when I did the research on this, I had like a moment of, oh, thank fucking God. Somebody in this case had a heart, had a brain, had humanity. They apparently begged Miyuki for more staff, more rations, heating measures to keep the children warm, literally fucking anything. But Miyuki's response was as cold as it was consistent. And she used to say, and this is a quote from her former staff, "Do as you're told." Now, I'm not trying to throw shade on these midwives, right? These women who worked for Miyuki, except that I am. Because honestly, why the actual fuck did they not report Miyuki to the authorities? You're telling me that they saw babies starving, freezing, and dying in droves, and their big move was to quietly resign and go home? That's not moral conflict. That is cowardice in a nurse's cap. And I am not here for it.
I almost wonder, though, how, like, if this person is so depraved and so messed up that they're, like, just slaughtering infants on a nearly daily basis or something like that, every 3 days if it's 100 in a year. Like, hey, where's, how quickly does that leap go to like, hey, if you start speaking up, you're out of here, especially somebody with that much money and power at the time.
Right.
Come on.
100%. But here's my thing. Write an anonymous note to the police. Do something. If you're worried for your safety or you're worried that you're going to somehow be shunned by like this powerful couple in the community, write an anonymous letter. Figure it the fuck out. Doing nothing is not an option. It really isn't. Especially these women trained in a profession, presumably because they have this particularly bleeding heart for babies and maternal care. And you know what I mean? That's a very distinct niche of medicine to go into. You have to have,
Sure.
Based on my experience, just as being a mother once in a maternity ward, like those nurses are made of different stuff. They really are. They are, in my experience, by and large, incredible human beings. This group, no. I give them no pass. Now, many of them did resign in protest, right? Again, if that's your big move, it ain't enough. One former employee told a newspaper, quote, "We were instructed to give each child just 2 spoonfuls of powdered milk, 3 spoonfuls of sugar and water 6 times a day. That's half the amount a normal child should receive." Now, again, they stayed silent until the spotlight hit. How many tiny coffins could have been avoided if they'd spoken up when it actually mattered? And there weren't even tiny coffins. They were just burned and discarded like trash. Of the children who survived, a handful were eventually reclaimed by their biological mothers, which I stated. The rest were adopted out to families who responded to the home's ads. And even then, when Miyuki was operating somewhat of an adoption agency, she squeezed every possible yen from the transaction, charging adoptive families 400 to 500 yen per child on top of the fee she'd already collected from the birth mothers. One woman who adopted a baby girl from Kotabuki recalled the moment in a newspaper interview following Miyuki's arrest, and she stated, quote, "When I said I wanted a girl, the midwife showed me 2 babies and said, 'This one's 300 yen, but this one's good looking, so I'll take 500. She acted like she was selling items in a shop," end quote. And you know what? She was. In her fucked up mind, she was. To Miyuki Ishikawa, a baby was no different than rice, sake, or powdered milk, just another commodity to sell, discard, or starve, depending on what turned the highest profit. Fuck you, Miyuki. Public outrage was swift and unforgiving. In the eyes of the public, it wasn't just the Ishikawas on trial either. It was an entire system that allowed such horrors to unfold in plain sight. The fallout from this case sent shockwaves through Japanese society, shaping national conversations around child welfare, access to birth control, and ultimately abortion, which we're going to get to, issues that continue to carry the weight of this legacy in Japan today. This case is a really significant case. So the criminal trial for the Ishikawas opened in June 1948 at a Tokyo district court, drawing national attention. Miyuki Ishikawa pleaded not guilty to the charge of murder, claiming her only failure was a lack of proper oversight over the midwives who worked beneath her. So now she's throwing them under the bus. But the truth was far more damning, obviously. The systematic neglect and abuse of children at the Kotabuki maternity home had not occurred in her absence. It had been carried out under her direct orders. Her own employees had protested the conditions. Some mothers, upon witnessing the horrifying treatment of the infants, actually fled the facility in panic and despair rather than leaving their children there. Talk about a Sophie's choice. You have a home in front of you and it is so bad that you're actually choosing to take the baby back with you in your scenario, which had to have been absolutely horrific for you to have gone to the maternity home in the first place. Where were these women supposed to turn? Long before the full scope of her crimes even came to light, she had already earned the fitting moniker of the demon midwife. In the end, Despite the staggering scope of the crimes, the Ishikawas were convicted only for the deaths of 5 children, the ones initially discovered in January of 1948. Miyuki Ishikawa received a sentence of 15 years in prison, and her husband, Takeshi, was sentenced to just 7. Assistant K, the assistant midwife, who was charged as an accomplice, was handed a sentence of 3 years. During that time, the Japanese law gave no rights to infants, clearly, because these sentences were slaps on the wrist.
Yeah, it's fucking wild. Fun fucking fact for you. So why it was so hard to find an actual exchange rate in yen to USD between 1940 and 1950 was because there wasn't one.
No shit.
It fluctuated all over the place. So like this is kind of what I've been doing on the sideline over here.
I knew it. I called you out on it. I'm like, I know what you're doing now, Tony.
So like there was apparently there was like so much inflation that like there was no like actual set exchange rate. And then because it was under the control of, obviously as we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, there was, it's kind of under the
American Allied.
American Allied,
Yeah.
So it was all over the place. And then by 1950, they set it at 360 yen to $1 US to just peg it and be like, we have to fix something here.
Interesting.
So, fun fact.
I actually think that's a really fun fact. That's very interesting.
Yeah. That's why it was so difficult to find an actual exchange rate. I was like, oh, this is usually super easy, but
even those modest penalties didn't stand for long. You guys are going to flip the fuck out. A subsequent court ruling, nailed that pronunciation by the way, halved the Ishikawa sentences, reducing Miyuki's to 8 years and Takeshi's to 4, while acquitting Assistant K altogether. Still unfucking satisfied, the Ishikawas appealed once more in April 1952. Yo, bro, you fucking killed babies, and you're complaining that your slap on the wrist is too harsh? Somebody just take these fucking people out. Like, this is so infuriating. But they got their way. This time, their sentences were reduced even further, down to 4 years for Miyuki and 2 for Takeshi. And here's where history intervened. All right. Miyuki Ishikawa was released from prison shortly after her appeal, not merely because of the reduced sentence, but under the sweeping general amnesty provisions of the San Francisco Peace Treaty, which officially ended the Allied occupation of Japan. Ratified that same month, the treaty granted broad clemency to many wartime and post-war prisoners as Japan transitioned back into sovereign governance. According to a 1969 interview with Miyuki, her release coincided with the treaty's implementation, effectively erasing what little remained of her punishment. In fact, and this is bananas, the treaty came into effect the same day as her appeal ruling. A little more than 4 years after her arrest for one of the most horrifying cases of institutional infanticide in modern history, Miyuki Ishikawa, aka the Demon Midwife, walked free. This case continued to rock the Japanese public and inspired passionate debate across all social classes and within the government. In early February 1948, standing before Japan's highest legislative body, Socialist Party member Michiko Yamazaki unleashed a searing critique of government inaction and the unchecked spread of organized crime, both of which she argued had enabled the tragedy at the Kotabuki maternity home. She stated, quote, "The Kotabuki maternity home is just the tip of the iceberg that has appeared between the waves. Politics should have ears that listen to the voices of the voiceless. Social facilities such as maternity hospitals, nursing homes, nursery schools, mother-child dormitories, and nurturing centers should be established by public institutions as soon as possible, and the weakest people should be saved as soon as possible through the administration of laws with love and tears. Particular effort should be put into it, and at the same time, we will enact, get ready for this, the eugenic protection law as soon as possible to control the childbirth of people who are in various unfortunate circumstances." End quote. Now, let us talk about that one for a hot sec here. The eugenic protection law which Michiko Yamazaki referenced in her call for stronger measures to quote-unquote control childbirth, was a deeply controversial piece of legislation, obviously. Originally enacted in 1948, it authorized the forced sterilization of individuals deemed unfit to reproduce. This included people with mental illnesses, hereditary diseases, physical disabilities, and even those suffering from leprosy. The law also permitted involuntary abortions if either parent was considered to carry such conditions under the justification of protecting public health and improving the nation's genetic stock. Ew. Just months later, in July 1948, the law was amended to allow abortion under a broader justification if the pregnancy endangered the mother's health. And by 1949, largely because of this case we are covering today, the scope widened again, this time to include economic hardship as a valid reason, effectively decriminalizing abortion in practice, though it technically remained a crime under the Penal Code. Advocates for abortion and birth control in post-war Japan seized on the Kotabuki maternity home devastation and the wave of investigations it triggered as a powerful tool for reform. The incident laid bare the dire consequences of forcing women to carry children that they could not support, and the tragic outcomes of a system that criminalized reproductive autonomy while offering little social safety net. In this context, the Kotabuki case became a galvanizing example used to push for the legalization and normalization of both abortion and contraception in Japanese law and society. Now, amidst the public outcry surrounding the Kotabuki scandal, not all reactions were grounded in empathy. Some actually took on a disturbingly fatalistic tone. Tokugawa Musi, a well-known humorist of the time, expressed sympathy, not for the victims, but for the hospital itself and the Ishikawas, echoing a widespread societal belief that the deaths of illegitimate children were tragic, yes, but somehow inevitable, as if their fate had been sealed the moment they were born outside the confines of marriage or stability or social acceptance. Understandably and thankfully, not everyone agreed with that lovely sentiment, but there were enough whisperings at the time. Like, what's the big deal? These kids were doomed anyway. Yuruko Miyamoto, a prominent feminist writer and social critic, publicly challenged this deeply ingrained prejudice and condemned the way society rationalized the deaths of these children by framing them as the natural consequence of illegitimacy. In a really, really powerful essay, which I read, I'm just going to read you an excerpt, she wrote, quote, "The fact that the children left at Kotabuki Maternity Hospital were not born legitimately is being presented as if it was inevitable that they were killed. But what difference does legitimacy make to the child herself? Regardless of the nature of the parent's relationship, the child is still a human being, a life that entered this world without choosing to be born. And in today's society, where family registers no longer even mark the distinction between legitimate and illegitimate children, every child has the right to a life protected by society, and we, in turn, have a duty to ensure it." End quote. She went on to criticize the state for its failure to protect these children, urging the Women's and Children's Bureau to take responsibility for addressing the economic and social realities that made places like Kotabuki possible. And her call to action was clear. The state must provide institutional support, child care centers, maternity hospitals, and daycare facilities as part of a functioning society, not leave such services to be exploited by private actors. And change, however belated, did come. In the wake of the scandal, the Japanese government centralized oversight of child welfare services. Private maternity homes like Kotabuki were shuttered, and the Japanese Midwives Association, to which Miyuki Ishikawa had belonged, was formally dissolved. The Kotabuki case had exposed the absolutely horrific consequences of systemic neglect, and in doing so, forced the country to rethink how it cared for its most vulnerable citizens. The exact number of the Ishikawa victims is unknown, as I've said a couple of times, but the police estimates put it somewhere between 103 and 169 babies. Only 30 of the mothers came forward after the initial arrests, and it's believed that many of the parents of the unregistered, quote-unquote illegitimate children placed in the home were too ashamed to admit that they had given their children to them. And so the exact number of children who were killed remains a mystery. Given the rumors and innuendo surrounding the Ishikawa's business and the fact that investigation of maternity homes proved this was not an isolated incident, it's possible some of the parents left their children in Miyuki Ishikawa's care knowing full well what would happen to them. I mean, I don't subscribe to that, but it is something that pops up consistently in the research, so I said it. But I didn't feel good saying it. I'm just letting that be known. I did not feel good saying it, and I don't agree with it.
I mean, though, you kind of mentioned earlier that, like, there were some people that, like, showed up and were like, no, I'm out of here. So, like, which would lead you to believe that it was almost, like, maybe kind of out in the open? Like, what was happening?
Could have been.
You know what I mean?
Right, because some parents went to bring their children and then saw the conditions and left.
And they said, no, forget this. I'm out of here. Yeah.
Yeah, it could have been that some of the parents knew the shitty conditions and were so desperate they left their children anyway.
Sure.
Not that I'm letting them off the hook if they did that, knowing how awful it was. But I don't know if I'm just like looking through rose-tinted shades here or what, but I just can't, or maybe I just can't stomach the idea that parents knew what was happening and made the choice to leave their children anyway. But desperate times called for desperate measure. I don't know. This is now I'm having a battle in my brain and it's coming out of my mouth and everyone's hearing it.
It's a very conflicting topic to try to dive into. There's so many other tangents that you can, like, to start even thinking about, like, the mentality of somebody who was, like, even forced to be in that position directly after World War II, under the Reconstruction phase and everything else that was going on. I mean, you're like wild. Like, you can't. I don't even know if you can fathom.
You can't. I said that earlier. I'm like, I'm not even going to try to label the emotions or try to understand what they were going through. It would be...
You just can't.
You can't. And I feel like it would just be wrong to even try. 21 years after the incident, Miyuki Ishikawa, who by that point was a free woman and a successful real estate and sales mogul, continued deflecting accountability by placing the burden squarely on the parents who had left their children in her care. In a newspaper interview she provided in 1969, she defended her actions by saying, quote, "I never killed the children. Killing would mean strangling the child myself or putting my hands on the child. I would never do such a thing. No, the children certainly died, but I also fed them as much as possible. I had the children examined by a doctor, but the children still died. It wasn't just at our maternity hospital that infants died. They died because they didn't have anything to eat at that house or at this house or at that house. And not only that, they were children who were left in our care as if they were abandoned. Not a single parent would have come to the maternity home to check on their child. And then, after it became an incident, they would say, 'My child was treated so badly. I gave birth to a bastard child and I had no choice but to abandon her. But which is worse? Think about it.'" End quote. So now seems like a great time to take a closer look at the darker corners of Miyuki Ishikawa's fucked up psyche.
I totally thought you were about to do a pop quiz.
Oh,
yeah, I know. It was like ramping up. Pop quiz, man.
I really had you going there. I'm sorry.
Pop quiz, Brooke. Give us an impromptu pop quiz.
Fine, pop quiz. How angry does this case make me on a scale of 1 to 10? A, 1, B, 5, C, 10.
I'm going to guess D, 12.
You nailed it, Tony.
Done.
In the chaotic, famine-stricken years following the war, Miyuki appeared to develop a warped sense of mercy, a twisted form of pity reserved specifically for the infants of impoverished families. She somehow convinced herself, it would seem, that these children were better off dead than condemned to lives of hunger, instability, and suffering. But her so-called compassion didn't manifest in charity or care. It manifested in calculated neglect. Rather than nourish, she starved. Rather than comfort, she turned away. In her mind, though she was not committing murder, she was, disturbingly, offering a release. It's like that angel of mercy or angel of death type of phenomenon. This rationalization allowed her to operate without remorse. So she never cried, she never flinched, she didn't even see herself as a killer because the death served a purpose. But what truly defined Miyuki wasn't just a lack of empathy, it was her utter disconnection from human life as anything other than a burden to be managed, a problem to be eliminated, or worse, a transaction to be monetized. Her psychological profile suggests a chilling combination of utilitarian logic, bureaucratic detachment, and unshakable superiority. I mean, she had a God complex up the fucking wazoo. She believed she knew best, better than the mothers who trusted her, better than the authorities, and certainly better than the voiceless children she let die.
Certainly maximizing your actions for the good of other people there. Absolutely.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Not.
We're buying it completely. To my knowledge, Miyuki was never diagnosed with psychopathy, but if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, you know what I'm saying? Let's go through it. Lacked empathy or remorse? Quack. Manipulativeness? Quack. Callousness? Quack. A sense of superiority or entitlement? Quack. Instrumental, cold-blooded decision-making? Quack. Inability to accept responsibility for wrongdoing? Quack. So, she's a duck. She's a fucking duck.
It's got more ducks than a Jeep Wrangler.
Miyuki Ishikawa, that demented duck, died a wealthy woman in the late 1980s, unrepentant until the very end. She never expressed remorse, never apologized to the families, and never acknowledged the lives she extinguished. And yet, her legacy left an undeniable mark on Japan. Her crimes became the catalyst for sweeping change: stricter government oversight of maternity care, the dissolution of private maternity homes, the centralization of child welfare policies, and a revaluation of reproductive rights in post-war Japan. She exposed what happens when the state fails to protect its most vulnerable and what horrors can flourish in that vacuum. Her monstrous behavior also helped catalyze one of the darkest legacies of the era, the Eugenic Protection Law of 1948. Pop quiz. The Eugenic Protection Law was a policy that sanctioned the forced sterilization of how many people across Japan from 1948 until it was finally abolished in 1996.
96? What?
That was during our lifetime.
Dude.
A, approximately 10,000 people were sterilized. B, approximately 25,000. C, approximately 60,000.
I don't know. With like the population boom, C is what I'm definitely leaning towards.
Okay. Well,
Matt, what you think?
yeah, what do you think, Matt?
Random guessing on a test-taking skill set is always the middle answer, so B.
Well, Matt, once again, somehow, you have landed on the correct answer. Sorry, Tony, it's not your day
That's
today.
Fine. It's fine. I'll take the L.
An estimated 25,000 people across Japan. Many were even subjected to the procedure without consent, and some were never even told that it was done. The violation. Holy shit. What began as a state effort to manage reproduction and public health quickly descended into a quiet, systematic violation of bodily autonomy carried out in the name of social order. The law remained in effect for nearly 5 decades until, as I mentioned, it was finally abolished in 1996. Another outcome, by the way, and seemingly the only positive one of the Kotabuki tragedy, was a move toward professional accountability, because in the wake of public outrage, Japan introduced a national licensing and examination system for midwives, a direct attempt to prevent such abuses of power from being repeated under the guise of maternal care. Okay, well, you get a point for that. The story of Miyuki Ishikawa, aka the Demon Midwife, is not just a crime story. It's a profound tragedy, a quiet indictment of a society that really looked the other way. Behind every statistic was a child, a life that never had a chance to begin, a name never spoken, a future quietly extinguished. And behind each of those children stood a mother, often alone, often shamed, who believed she was doing the best she could in a world that offered her no safe path forward. Was she doing the best she could with the tools she had, Tony? I see you kicking that around in your head.
That was just the line I was expecting to come next.
Well, I don't know, because let's say a mother knew what was happening in that home and decided to leave the child there anyway. Could we say she did the best she could with the tools she had?
Again, that's kind of what we were talking about a little bit earlier too.
Yeah.
It's just like you there's no way you can put yourself into that position of being like, this is the two horrendous choices that I have, and I only have two absolutely horrendous choices. And it's like,
it's Sophie's choice. It's just, there is no good option, except unless some of these women, which I believe, thought that this maternity home was going to offer a safe place and adopt their child out.
Yeah, it's like the one little like ray of like sunshine. And again, this is post-war Japan,
Correct.
Immediate post-war Japan, where like things are extra fucked there.
Yeah.
I mean, your country just got 2 atomic bombs dropped on it, right?
Oh, horrible.
Horrific. Yeah, right. So like in the wake of like seeing all that devastation and destruction that nobody had ever seen like unleashed on like civilian populations before, on top of the chaos of everything else that's going on, like it's kind of like, well, I guess maybe like, the 1% chance that they're going to be okay is better than the 0% chance if they stay with me and, without food and being able to be taken care of, right? Yeah.
The strongest human emotion, my understanding, is hope. And I think when you're in a society that's literally crumbling and you yourself have no food, and there is this couple, one of whom is a registered midwife, saying, I will take your baby and I will find your baby a beautiful home and I will care for your baby until that happens. I mean, it's all you got. It's all you got is that hope that that is what's going to actually happen. It's so devastating. Miyuki's actions were absolutely monstrous, but she was not the only one complicit. She operated within a system that failed at every level, failed to protect, failed to intervene, to value the lives of those deemed inconvenient or unworthy. Poverty, stigma, and silence did much of the work before she ever did. She died decades later, right? A free and wealthy woman, untouched pretty much by the full weight of justice. But the children, forgotten by law, overlooked by policy, and erased from memory, left behind something powerful. Their silent suffering stirred an entire nation. Their absence forced a reckoning. They had no voice, no defense, but in the end, they changed so much. And so we remember them, not as footnotes in a courtroom or shadows in a scandal, but as lives that mattered, and as human beings who will never be forgotten, at least not here with us. And that's the case. Have you ever seen the movie Elf, Tony? If you say no,
it's been a very long time.
Well, let me remind you, and I don't know, this has really zero relevance with the case, except that in the opening scene, I think, of Elf, or like the human opening scene, so not in the North Pole, but down with Buddy's father, he was in a meeting and he was like telling this nun that he wasn't going to be donating books to the children in her orphanage because like it was too much money. And he was like, money hungry. That was his character. And there's this line where he's like, listen, it's just the bottom line. Like it doesn't financially make sense. We can't do it. And there's this little elderly nun and she goes, but the children love the books. If you've seen Elf, you know that I just nailed that impersonation. Just now in my conclusion when I said, but the children, it reminded me of that. This is not relevant, but it's a little ADHD moment for me. So you've gone on the journey with me.
Maybe a little streak of happiness to bring us out of that
sometimes you need it.
Cesspool.
And I've been in this cesspool of horror, obviously, researching. And then the thing is like, you don't want to, I've said this, said this earlier. I don't feel like it's even right to try to understand what they're feeling, but you also have to try to put yourself in people's shoes so that you can empathize and you can try to understand that the decisions that they were forced to make and, give you the big picture, the big spectrum of emotions and the weight of what they were dealing with. So, you can't turn a blind eye. But a couple of times I put myself like too comfortably in their shoes, I'll say, and had to step away from this research.
Well, and it's crazy because on Miyuki's side of it, like she's just taking advantage of the situation, of the chaos of the situation, up, down, left, right, and center. It's like, hey, what can I do to like exploit everything in my power for all the financial gain, all the personal gain that I can possibly get because of the chaos that's absolutely surrounding me. It's just like...
It's like Ozzy Osbourne dying. King of Darkness, right? It's like people selling T-shirts 60 seconds after they found out he was dead. It's like they're completely capitalizing on the situation, on the fact that people are going to be distraught and they're going to be making them money, buying their merch, whatever. That's a silly example, obviously, but it still holds water.
Also, by the way, R.I.P. So sad. So glad that he was able to actually do a final performance and...
Oh, he fucking crushed, man. He crushed his life. Like, seriously.
I really wonder if, like, after he got done with that show, it was just like, man, I'm just good now.
Yeah.
I'm just good. This is the final, like, bookend that I wanted for everything that, like, the craziness that's happened, and now I'm just good to go.
It's possible. Honestly, it's really possible. I mean, he... Fucking legend. That's putting it lightly. The kids actually heard firefighter Dave and I talking about Ozzy's death this morning. And they were like, who's Ozzy Osbourne? And we were like, get out. Just get out of the kitchen.
Who raised you?
Meanwhile, my son was born to Ozzy Osbourne's Crazy Train. That's the song that we had playing. Yes, Matt, who's dying.
That explains so much.
It does. So for him to not know who Ozzy is, it was just like, what's happening? Anyway, super heavy case. Tony, I was really happy to have you punctuating this case today. And Matt, you as well. And your pop quizzes were like crushing, somehow amazing. Tony, you crushed in every other way.
This is what you pay me to do.
Excellent. I'm glad to see you.
Check signed, crushed.
Return on investment right here in this episode. But yeah, I want to also just remind everyone to subscribe to the Psychopedia channel, obviously, so that you don't miss future content that's coming out, which will be bonus episodes, obviously lots of stuff up my sleeve, but also my new podcast series, Girl on Gore, which is out now, which drops on this feed. So wherever you listen to your podcast, if you could hit subscribe, that would be amazing. And let me know what you thought of this episode, or if you have any thoughts on anything, really. I'm your person. Leave a comment. I will see it. I will respond to the extent that I can, as long as you're nice. And if you don't want to say anything, but you want to leave your part and do a heart, that is always tremendously appreciated.
Do your part, leave a heart.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, and that's it, you guys. Thank you, as always, for being here. If you've made it this far, you are the realest of the real. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I can't honestly thank you enough. I'm going to actually get emotional, I think, because this case was emotional. So I'm just going to get off the airways now. Love you guys so, so, so much. And I will see you next week. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Fucking disaster. Unhinged.
Seriously.